I hosted the Boston one and 30 people came out and they were so excited. It was like a 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning and it was pouring rain. And
definitely not at night and definitely alcohol is not involved.
Yeah, and we met at the public library and we were just like standing outside and everyone just had this like excited toddler look on their face because they're like, oh my God, I didn't know there were 30 other vegans who don't drink alcohol and go to sleep at 8 p.m. in this town.
Welcome to Seacoast Stories, a podcast about the people, businesses, and newsmakers that make the Seacoast an American hidden gem. I'm Trey Farkas, and on today's episode, a couple's rash decision to move to San Francisco, what they learned from working in Silicon Valley, and why they're determined to make hanging out great again. Today's story starts 2 months ago at White Heron. I'm having a lovely conversation with another Seacoast creative, Mike Teixeira. We're going in the weeds of podcasts. I'm telling Mike about my work at Spotify, my lengthy production process for this podcast, and how I book guests for the show, when suddenly, a young woman behind Mike interrupts us. She says, "Excuse me, do you guys work in tech?" I pause for a moment. Spotify is an audio company, but we have engineers and AI and algorithms, so yeah, I guess it's a tech company, even though I know nothing about SaaS and LAN parties, which you'll learn about later in the show. So I tell her I work in tech, and she says she does too. When she overheard me throw out techie terms like Riverside and Descript, she felt called to say something because, as she would tell me, it's difficult to find other tech people on the Seacoast. With her husband next to her, the four of us start chit-chatting. Mike and I find out that these two, Raechel and Ryan Lambert, they're kinda a big deal. The two of them spent 7 years in San Francisco, working in tech when Silicon Valley was at its peak, when Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Uber, Airbnb, and others were growing faster than the speed of light. After that, Raechel hands me a business card, and once she leaves, I learn more about the company she and Ryan own together, River. River is an in-person event and social platform that, at its core, wants to bring people together. So it's no surprise that Raechel interrupted us that day, because she and Ryan agree with me that the world needs real connection, real conversation, and more people who aren't afraid to strike up conversation with others. And on today's episode, Raechel and Ryan tell me their incredible story, how a famous book convinced them to move across the country, what it was like working in Silicon Valley, how a podcast sparked the idea for the River app, the painstaking process of getting $1.6 million in investment, and most importantly, why it's crucial that we start hanging out with each other once more. I love every part of this story, and I think you will too. And it begins with how Raechel and Ryan met each other nearly 20 years ago.
Ray and I met, we were at a swing dance conference and...
I'm sorry, hold on, I have to stop you. A swing dance conference? What is that? You said that so casually, like that's something that we all are very familiar with.
I learned to swing dance, like, I don't even know, like 20 years ago now in college. This conference, the big one that everybody knows of is called the Boston Tea Party.
Of course.
Probably is still going on. It is. But yeah, she was teaching a Charleston class. I was doing the Charleston and I looked up and I kind of was like, oh, she's kind of cute. And then she just winked at me. Like she saw me looking at her and winked at me in the mirror.
And then we danced later.
I think we exchanged emails.
Wow.
Pre-iPhone.
Yeah. Yeah, this was pre-smartphone actually.
Yeah.
So like even texting is like, how much do I want to talk to this guy? Like,
yeah, you had to type A, B, C, A, JKL, JKL.
And you only had, at least I did, only 10 text messages per day. So you had to be very deliberate with who you were spending your messages on.
That's true. Right. Yeah, we switched
on
emails,
a Razor phone.
Emailed back and forth. And then, yeah, our first date was in Portsmouth at Popovers. It had just opened.
She can't remember what she ate because she ate it so fast. And I was so nervous. I know exactly what I ordered. It was like a little minestrone soup and I didn't even finish it. think I had like 3 bites.
I'm so curious about, because I'm in a lot of fitness classes and yoga classes, and you may have a cute instructor that you're like, I wonder what their situation is. But for me, I've never really crossed that boundary because it feels inappropriate to go from student teacher to something else. So how did you wrestle with that?
I'll say in dance, it's usually not someone's professional livelihood. Usually it's just a hobby for everyone, even the instructors. Like the best instructors in the world in Lindy Hop often are already college professors or they have something else going on. So you're not really interfering with someone's work. I don't know. You're not like hitting on someone at work in a way. It is more social.
Okay. So you guys met there, had your magical popovers date. The rest was history. You guys got married pretty quickly, right?
Yeah, like a year and a half later, I'd say.
Wow. How did you guys know, Ryan, how did you know that Raechel was the one for you?
I don't know. We just kind of seemed like we were getting to the point. When we were communicating, we were pretty organized about it.
Email, of course.
We were like, not interested in just like going back and forth, just like write an email. Maybe the other person writes back like a week later, schedule some time to like get together. She was going to UNH. I was going to Wentworth, which was in Boston, like actually living our lives. Although once in a while we would schedule a phone call and we would chat for like 3 hours.
Yeah, long conversations. Whenever we were driving somewhere, we never listened to the radio. We're always just chatting, talking. You just know. I do feel like I see people dating for like years and years on end, and it just makes me sad because I think part of it is just both people committing and just saying, hey, this is looking good. We're both just committed to making it work. I think if you're looking for reasons for it not to work, you'll just hem and haw forever and just waste a lot of time. But yeah, when Ryan first brought it up that we should get married, we were kind of long distance. I actually didn't finish at UNH because I was studying finance and I realized how expensive it was. So I was, because I'm from Maine originally, so I was studying at USM. He was graduating from Wentworth and he was like, we should get married. And I was like, no, I have to finish college. And he's like, yeah, but if we got married this summer, you could move in with me. We wouldn't be long distance and you could pay in-state tuition at UMass Boston. And I was like, well, I was definitely going to marry you eventually anyway. And this just seems cheaper and easier and faster. So yes.
We love a pragmatic approach to marriage.
Yeah.
Okay. So Ray, you were studying finance, got
Yes.
out of that.
Yeah. Hated it.
What did you transition to and what did you want your career to look like?
Yeah. I mean, I studied finance just because I really wanted a surefire job. I'm definitely a creative person at heart, but I did not want to be hungry. Studied that, got a job at State Street Bank, which is very typical. If you graduate from UMass from finance, 80% chance you just go right into the State Street farm. I was working there pretty miserable, just did not enjoy finance. Tried switching to another smaller boutique firm, thinking that I would enjoy that more. Hated it more. And then Ryan actually read The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss because he was a mechanical engineer. We both changed careers years ago. He read The 4-Hour Workweek and he's like, whoa, there's some really interesting ideas in here. You have to read it. So I read it. Then we went to a coffee shop to have like a meeting about it, which was kind of rare because we were so cheap at the time. We definitely weren't going out to coffee. And
Barnes & Noble, Route 1, Revere.
Okay, yeah, Barnes & Noble, Route 1, Revere. And we were like, what is this angel investment thing? Because Tim Ferriss was speaking of angel investing. He was talking about Silicon Valley. We're like, what is this?
For those of you who don't know, Tim Ferriss is really big in the personal development space.
Yeah.
Is really kind of one of the OGs of that whole space, which is now really taken off.
Yeah, and one of the original podcasters as well. He just celebrated his 10th anniversary of his pod. And yeah, so he really kind of introduced us to Silicon Valley. We started kind of going down the rabbit hole of startups and realized that that's where we both wanted to be.
I feel like for us, that was the belief that we could actually make bets outside of what we saw other people in our lives make. You know, most people that we grow up with, they wanted to go to college, they wanted to get a job, make whatever, some median salary per year, have kids, whatever. And reading that book, it's so funny because the title is like, makes it sound like, oh, I'm a lazy person.
People.
And it's like, no, after I read that book, I wanted to do everything, like viscerally, which I think everybody should read a book like that or that book.
Yeah, I think it lifted the veil on the path you have to take and really exposed us to agency, like having high agency and figuring out a way to be more leveraged and have more ownership. Because before that, we both worked at pretty big companies or really traditional career paths. We started applying to jobs and startups in San Francisco, but we were pretty young and we had no experience in startups and very little experience in just general. So no one was flying us across the country to come in for an interview. So we realized we just have to be there. We're not going to break in.
And what year is this?
2012.
Okay.
It took us a while to save up money and get out there and kind of figure out a plan. Like I said, we were applying online, but no one was flying us out for interviews. And so the agreement was Ryan was making more money than me. So we agreed I would give up my job and I would find an apartment and a job. I would go out, like rent a place on Craigslist. I rented a room for 30 days. And the agreement was if I could get a job in an apartment, he would give up his notice at his company and follow me out. And if not, I would just fly home with my tail between my legs and we'd regroup. So I got a bartending job really quickly. That was pretty easy. The apartment proved very challenging. I was not used to how expensive and competitive the market was, but found an apartment. And then Ryan followed me out a couple months later.
I went and got a job as a valet and then occasionally bar backing at the restaurant that she was at.
Yeah, so I left a job in finance. He, before that, he'd been working on atomic clocks. He'd worked on the Keurig K-Cup. He'd been designing like multi-axis force platforms. And now we're in San Francisco bartending and parking cars.
I mean, I remember valeting near Billionaires Row in San Francisco, and the Getty family was having a party, and I was like parking a Jaguar, and the guy was like, here you go, like dropping the keys, giving me a $5 tip. I'm like, this is actually a fucking wild and amazing experience. Like, as much as it's like, yeah, you're not really making any money, it's like, I'm working next to regular folks and this is so wild. Like, this is wild. Like, I had to pee. So they were like, oh yeah, go through like the Downton Abbey entrance down the back.
The staff entrance.
And like, I honestly, I would consider doing it again if the opportunity was there, because it's just, I feel really comfortable being in touch with the working person also, I guess, from
doing any kind of work that is needed to like run your business or take a risk. I see a lot of people, they're so dogmatic about the type of work they have to do and then kind of clips their opportunities or possibilities of what they can do. And so we knew it wouldn't be forever, but it's just like, hey, let's not burn through savings while we're here. Like, let's earn some cash while we're looking for tech jobs. And only had to do that for 3 or 4 months, but worked out fine.
Okay, so how did you eventually find your tech jobs in San Francisco?
Yeah, we were going to some meetups, applying, and there was this one startup I got really excited about. And I had applied normally with like normal resume, cover letter, all that. But I was just up late at night, very excited about it. And apparently I like replied to my submission email at 2 a.m. And I was just like, by the way, like I can't stop thinking about this job. This is perfect for me. I really hope you call me. And everyone's applying and it's all these emails. They all pretty much look the same. And then there's one at 2 a.m. and it says, 2 emails been sent. And I think they just responded to that energy. I would never recommend that to people as a tactic. So it came across as really authentic. And they're like, oh, let's talk to her. And it was this kind of hybrid finance operations / office manager role at a startup, which was great because I just got exposed to the full operations of a business, helped with closing fundraising rounds, planning an office build out, but also like planning a holiday party. It was just everything. I was the 19th employee at this startup and it was insane. When I moved to San Francisco, I had 1 suitcase and like 3 pairs of shoes. And I brought one of the pairs of shoes I brought was typical finance, like 3.5-inch high heel, like stiletto shoes, which in San Francisco is hilarious because like no one wears high heels. Like I just showed up in like a pencil skirt and a blouse and high heels. And then when I walked in, everyone was at standing desks in like cargo shorts. Some of them had gone surfing that morning, so they're still wearing their swim trunks. I was like, what the hell? This isn't a real company, but somehow they hired me anyway, even though I looked completely ridiculous. But it just shows you how little I knew or understood about like tech and startups that I just showed up in my like suit.
So you two would end up staying 7 years in San Francisco, and Ryan would actually join your company via a crazy story. He would rack and stack servers at your company, whatever that means. We could spend 5 hours talking about all the ins and outs of your Silicon Valley careers, but I do want to talk a lot about River. But before we move on, I'm sure you guys have some wild stories from your times in San Francisco, because you two were there at the height of when Meta really became what it is, when Twitter really becomes what it is, when Uber and Airbnb and all the companies that are so ubiquitous with our lives now, they really popped off in that era. So were you guys there feeling that energy? What was it like being in San Francisco when there was just so much happening and anyone who's anyone was there?
Do you remember the drama with the Uber Waymo drama? So that, I can't remember it's like somebody stole something from somebody.
I think it was 2015 because we were living in Soma at the time.
Right. We lived in Soma and we start seeing these semi tractor trailer trucks parked in the parking lot across from our building. Just like tons of semis, and they got these like spinny camera things on top, and they're just, the cameras things just, I'm like, what the hell is this? It's spinning like all night. And then it turns out that's where Uber was putting their, that's funny. That's where Uber's putting their Waymo stuff.
Yeah. So I remember the scandal because an engineer left from Waymo, joined Uber before the headlines hit, which was very juicy at the time because it's like stealing a lot of code. The parking lot across the street from us that had all the Uber semi trucks all of a sudden was getting football stadium floodlights and like armed guards in the front. And I was like, what is going on over there? And then like 2 days later, this news drops that like a bunch of the code base had been stolen. So yeah, that was kind of interesting. A lot of parties, a lot of shit that should not be happening at parties. I ended up, there's so many.
No comment.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you still have shares at companies. So you're like, yeah, I'm not going to spill the beans because you want them to be, your shares to be worth something. But
not just that, but you hear comedians making jokes about certain substances people using. You're like, yeah, even though most of them are illegal, and then you actually see it and you're like, oh, I'm an adult now. I saw someone,
I mean, let's just say the show Silicon Valley is like most people think it's a parody. It is extremely real.
The San Francisco protests, like that's an experience. If you're
what was that?
There's always something.
A lot of activism.
Like every month, there's probably a few about something. It's kind of cool. I mean, obviously, the political persuasion is very far to the left, but that's like quintessential San Francisco. The karaoke, the best karaoke bar in the entire world.
Our favorite.
The Mint in San Francisco. If you haven't been there, you should go.
I would just say the velocity and the energy of San Francisco is just so much more intense. There's more going on. There's more ideas. There's more really outlier, interesting people. I mean, people from all over the world, if they're super ambitious and they want to build something, that's where they go. And it is infectious. A lot of maker spaces, a lot of hackathons, a lot of people getting together on a Friday night. I feel like Boston
Nexi
college
with the bots.
Yeah,
the
I feel like Boston
bots.
College kids are just like going out to sports bars and drinking. But in San Francisco, it's like, let's stay up all night and write code. It's a very interesting thing.
At one of our LAN parties, Ryan Kirkman was like, hey, do you want to read this white paper with me? And I'm just like, this is
people
San
reading
Francisco.
white papers.
at a LAN party.
I would say
what's a LAN party?
Oh, a local.
Oh, it's like where everybody, LAN means local area network. And
of course.
It used to be that internet was super slow. So you'd have all your friends come over your house and you'd set up a local area network. So your latency would be super quick.
Less lag.
But Ryan was like, let's read some papers.
Cultural difference between the East and the West Coast is here. People often ask you where you went to college, even if that was 20 years ago. In San Francisco, they'll be like, what are you hacking on right now? Like, what are you building right now? And then like, if you in San Francisco or West Coast in general, if you just say, hey, I've got this idea, people will be like, cool, like, can I help? Or they're very interested in it. Here, people will laugh at you. Or they just have this like, well, you can't do that because of this. You know, it's just, you just very constantly, very permission oriented, very credentialism over here. Whereas the West Coast feels way more just, what have you built lately? Let me see your GitHub. Like, what have you deployed? It just feels like a lot less friction to create and build and try new things. And yeah.
When you guys are working at several different startups and are just around all of this energy for a few years, does it ever enter into your mind, hey, I want to break off and go start building my own thing?
Absolutely. But so I ended up shifting out of finance into marketing, and I got a product marketing job at Intercom, which at the time wasn't that well known, but I'm sure they'll go public and they're extremely well recognized now. You know, when you see how hard it is, even when it's going extremely well, you're just like, yeah, of course I would love to build my own thing, but like how? And I think most people don't realize how hard it is to come up with an actual idea that has a large total addressable market, a business that can actually like really make money that hasn't already been done and solved. You know, sometimes I watch like the original founder of like DoorDash, and he was just like, oh, I was born near Stanford and the internet was invented. And all of a sudden, you know, all these small restaurants, they didn't have capacity for a full-time delivery driver. So we'll just do fractional ones. And like the obvious ideas have been built. And so the idea of coming up with a business that was big enough to be enticing or interesting and hadn't been solved, it just felt like that was getting squeezed and all the margins were kind of gone. So I wanted to, but I was not hopeful that I would come upon an idea to build.
So when and why did you two leave San Francisco, Ryan?
I think 100% of it was just we kind of felt like being closer to family and friends. We chose New York because we still felt like we had more swings in us, and we felt like we needed to be in a city where you can make a lot of connections to take those swings. And I still think there's a lot of truth to that. So I think we would have stayed in New York for quite a bit longer.
Yeah, we were living in a studio in Hell's Kitchen. So Ryan pivoted into data science, which we didn't really talk about. I pivoted into marketing. We both moved to New York and got jobs. Ryan was working at American Express, like down in Wall Street. I ended up starting my own product marketing agency, so I was working mostly remotely. We went from literally never being home and just like making light meals at home in a studio to being home 24/7, both of us trying to take work calls, and it just was untenable. So we're not real New Yorkers, so COVID kicked us out. But yeah, I have several employees in Portugal and wanted to travel and check that out. So we were there for 3 months. We like wrote out the whole visa. We were only planning on being there for a month, but we just loved it. And then
Great country.
Yeah, beautiful.
You guys get a good situation over there.
Beautiful place, beautiful people. Lisbon's actually a lot like San Francisco, so that was interesting. Then I got invited to do like a video series with Pep Laya in Austin, Texas. So we're like, okay, let's go to Austin. We were there for 6 weeks. We thought, hey, maybe we'll move to Austin, but Ryan had terrible
Too
allergies.
much pollen. Sorry. I can't. If you
I've never heard that reason for someone
It's such
not
an
moving
honest
somewhere.
reason, but
if you do not have allergies, I challenge you to go to Austin any time of the year, because the whole year it's like, oh, okay, from like January to June, you're going to have cedar. And then from like July to October, it's this other oak one. And then it's like there's 2 weeks where there's not pollen in the air.
right. And I woke up one night to pee and Ryan was wearing a mask to bed. And I was like, honey, we can't live here. Because we actually knew a lot of people that moved to Austin and we would have
Cool
had
place.
friends. Yeah, cool place, but not for us. But yeah, ended up moving to Miami and wanting to be a part of the tech scene that was kind of emerging after COVID. A lot of people left New York and San Francisco for Miami. So we're like, okay, let's check this out. Did not love it though. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. I want to put a pin in this and take a hard right turn. Ray, can you tell me what is the All In podcast and when did you start listening to it and what do you love so much about it?
Yeah. So the All In podcast is for kind of business tycoon friends who all used to play poker together, and they would have really juicy conversations about startups and markets and politics. And then someone's like, hey, we should start recording these conversations. So it was during the pandemic. They released it. I was already familiar with the hosts of it, though, because David Sachs, he was early PayPal Mafia, one of the early PayPal employees. He founded Yammer. I had friends that worked at Yammer. He got bought by Microsoft. Chamath Palihapitiya is the founder of Social Plus Capital. They're an investor in Intercom at the company I worked for. And then Jason Calacanis, early investor in Uber. He took a $25,000 check and turned that into $24 million.
Not bad.
And he has one of the longest, I think maybe the longest running podcast called This Week in Startups. It's very niche because it's really like early stage founders. You know, it's not a broad market, but long running pod. And then David Friedberg, who is early Google. He was the one I was not familiar with. So listening to this pod, people who've been building companies, they have a friend relationship where they kind of razz each other a lot. And then they also just politically, they diverge from each other. So it's one of the few shows where you can get two liberals and two conservatives at the same time. So that was really interesting. They hosted a summit in Miami, which I attended. I noticed that it's mostly men who listen to the podcast. And so I was like, hey, I'll put together a women's brunch. I'll just make a reservation for 12 people and any women I see on Twitter saying that they're going, I'll just DM them, invite them to this brunch. My mentor was like, you should invite J. Cal to your brunch. I was like, he's not going to come.
J. Cal, one of the hosts.
J. Cal, Jason Calacanis, yeah, the Uber investor. I was like, he's not going to come. He's running a conference. But I invited him anyway, and he came to brunch and ended up buying us all brunch, and lots of selfies were taken. And at the conference, I was then known as Brunch Girl, which could be better, could be worse.
yeah, that's not bad.
People were like, oh my God, you're a brunch girl. I'm like, yes, that's me. And so one of the women I met at the brunch, Melissa Varelli, she's like a free speech lawyer at Meta in San Francisco. She was saying, hey, I want to host this listening party for episode 100 because she knew I was traveling. I was like, oh, I'd love to, but I just moved to Miami. But if you don't mind, I'll copy you and we can be twinsies and I'll host one in Miami as well. And then I made this form and Jason ended up tweeting it out and it went viral. And I was planning on there being a meetup in San Francisco, Miami. But I left a little opening on the form, write in your other city if you want to have it in your city. I was like, oh, maybe New York, But the form went viral and we ended up hosting.
Why? What was on this form?
Nothing was on this form. People love this podcast and they have a hard time meeting people in their real life who also love these types of topics. So the idea of like meeting someone locally who is maybe a little more politically open-minded, a little more pro-growth or more like into like capital allocation or building companies. The idea of like meeting other people, like kind of like-minded people in that way was really interesting to people. It just kind of snowballed and we ended up hanging out in 24 cities.
Wow. That's incredible. And why were you doing this?
That's a good question.
Good question. When I was staying up pulling all-nighters, Ryan was like, why the hell? I did not realize how much work it was going to be. I was like, oh, I just want to meet 10 cool new people in Miami. This will be the goal. That was the initial goal. And then I definitely wouldn't have done it if I realized how much work it was going to be. But by the time the momentum was there, I was like, I don't want to let all these people down. But then the emails, so it was 24 cities, but it was like 1,000 people signed up around the world. And I'm a marketer, so I have some tools up my sleeve. I ran all the emails through Apollo to see like what kind of jobs they had. And they were pretty juicy people. And I was like, damn, okay, cool list. Now, if I'm going to be in Zurich, I know who to call to have a coffee. I don't know. That was kind of the big expectation of it, just to be better networked. And then I had started a Slack group, which is like a group messaging platform, just so I could manage the host because I didn't want to be emailing everyone individually. That Slack is, 2,000, 3,000 people now, but that grew. I thought it was just like a one and done. Like that was weird, like a big flash in the pan. And then 6 months later, episode 125 came up and everyone was like, hey, Ray, like we're doing it again, right? And I was like, hell no. Why did I do that? That was too much work. But so many people asked that I was like, all right, hold on. Like, let me get the people what they want. There's got to be an app for this. I was really familiar with all the event platforms that exist, meetup.com, Eventbrite, which are kind of the more legacy ones. And then there's Partiful and Luma. And so I was like, okay, like we can solve this. I'll get a pro Luma account. I'll hook into the Luma API. I'll port that data over to this Airtable. Like we'll be good to go. It went more viral. We ended up hosting it in 50 cities around the world with 2,000 people the second time around. But it was literally the same or more work than doing it manually because these platforms are just not set up for distributed hosts, like letting the community self-organize. It's really meant for like you personally hosting one event a week or a couple events a week. It's just doesn't scale. So if you're going to check in like, hey, does London have a host? Has London sent a message? Has London set a location? The only way to do that was to have 50 tabs open and just track it offline in a spreadsheet. And so again, didn't realize how much work it was going to be. Ended up having to pull like 6 people from my product marketing agency just to help me get through the week.
Oh, wow. Now, why do you think there was such demand for this and people coming to you and saying, hey, more cities, more people need to be gathering together to celebrate this podcast?
I don't know if it was about celebrating the podcast because people think like, oh, just like a bunch of douchey fanboys. It's not that. It's just that if you are willing to sit through a 90-minute podcast that's high density of information, highly intellectual, comes out on Friday nights. Most people listen to it on Friday nights or a Saturday. You're just a certain kind of person. People like meeting other juicy, certain kinds of people. And we see this across our platform, River, in all sorts of communities. We did Brian Johnson events and I hosted the Boston one and 30 people came out and they were They were so excited. It was like a 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning and it was pouring rain. And
Definitely not at night, and definitely alcohol is not involved.
Yeah. And we met at the public library and we were just like standing outside and everyone just had this like excited toddler look on their face because they're like, oh my God, I didn't know there were 30 other vegans who don't drink alcohol and go to sleep at 8 p.m. in this town. Like people are just really searching for people they have things in common with, and just going to generic networking events is hard to find those people. So I don't think it's about, oh, I'm such a fan of this podcast. Like it's more, I feel lonely or disconnected, or I've moved to a city to be closer to my family, but now I don't feel like I'm near the people that light me up in a different way.
And so what did these events look like? What was the vibe of them?
Just plain meetups. And it initially started as a watch party, but we just abandoned that because now you need like a big TV and like AV. And it was like, nope, just get together in a bar or meet at a coffee shop and just meet other like-minded people.
Okay, so pretty informal.
So informal, so ridiculously informal. Sometimes people try to make it more complicated than it needs to be. Like, gotta reserve a room. I'm like, nope, just show up and commandeer a corner of the bar. That's literally all you need.
Like meetup.com provides distribution in a way. Like if you want to meet up with people, you go to meetup.com and then that's the distribution channel. Like you have to know that Meetup is where you go to meet up. But it's pretty clear that like every brand and influencer is also a meetup. Like they are a distribution channel. And there's no reason every brand and every influencer can't just do that. That's kind of what's happening is like people want to meet up, and ideology is kind of like one big reason people want to get together. But that's not the only thing. Like people want to eat a certain way. That's
Brian
like
Johnson.
surprising.
Yeah, Brian Johnson, for those you don't know, is a guy who essentially literally does not want to die. He's doing all of these crazy things, crazy diets, crazy potions, whatever. Yeah. And Ryan, you are currently adopting his eating philosophy where you eat a pound of vegetables in the morning. That's a whole other episode.
Boiled vegetables in the morning. Boiled vegetables.
So there's other people who also are crazy like you and want to do these things. And they want to get together and talk about it.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, it's so hard to meet each other. I mean, the only reason why we met is because I was overheard 2 keywords that you had said at this coffee shop. And you said the word descript. And I was like, oh, interesting. That's a transcription software that works very well, that not a lot of people in Portsmouth know about. And then you said Riverside, which is like a podcast hosting platform. I'm like, okay, this guy probably works in tech. Let me interrupt and insert myself, because it's very hard to meet people that work in tech that are in Portsmouth, that are in the West End, that, you know, because we don't walk around with name tags listing out all of our hobbies and passions.
Right. And you guys don't give off tech vibes either.
Do we? Do we not?
I don't think so. I mean, because I feel like tech people wouldn't do that. Tech people, at least in my stereotypes, are very to themselves and just want to code and have LAN parties.
Yeah. Maybe that's shifting a little bit. I mean, because you're in that category.
I'm tech adjacent.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you were organizing these events, you mentioned you were running into trouble with these other apps, that it wasn't set up to throw events in a streamlined way that you thought existed. What exactly were the problems that you were running into that were making your life difficult organizing these events?
So if you were to create a Facebook event, if you were to create 50 Facebook events, you'd have to literally create them 50 times. That could take you 10 minutes per event. I happen to be using Luma, and like, even if you duplicate an event template, you create an event listing, you duplicate it, but now you have to change the time zone. Now you have to change the cover image. Now you have to change the title. Now you have to change the location. This takes a long time when you're doing it 50
pasting a bunch of info.
Yeah.
It's really, really weird that's hard.
It's not hard because we do it in like one click, but at the time, there's no way to do it. So I'm duplicating these events 49 times, and then I'm trying to find a city image. And I'm like, well, actually, I've never been to Pittsburgh. What does Pittsburgh look like? I don't know, you know? And so just spinning up the events in 50 cities was already time consuming enough. And then finding people to host. So I would email the last host and be like, hey, do you want to host? And they'd be like, yeah. And then I would add their email to the event as the host. And they would be like, no, I just spent some time. And I was like, well, they're worldwide, simultaneous, like 50 cities in one day. Like, it's for this time. So just finding the host was time consuming. Or people would be like, yeah, I'm interested. And they like text me, but then they wouldn't give me their emails. And I have to chase. So getting people to register themselves as the host. Then the third problem was, once you're the host of the event, you have full rights to that event. You can delete it. You can delete the little blurb I wrote about all in meetups and, hey, join us in the Slack message. You can download the attendee list and upload them and subscribe them to your bullshit newsletter that nobody wants to read. And so Jason from All In was like excited about promoting these meetups. They talked about them many times in the pod, but the idea of like everybody's data just floating around the internet was hard. And then I had no way of tracking these events. Like the host said they would do it, but are they doing it? Like, did they pick a location? Do I need to find another host? Did they send a message? Like, are they engaged? Are they locked in? So there's no big dashboard. I just had to track that all on like a spreadsheet. And when Jason saw that we did 50 cities, he's like, holy hell, how the hell did you pull this off? Like, I hire full-time event managers. They've never had this many events in, a year, let alone a day. And I was just like, bodies, man. Just
and
bodies.
To be clear, they had no affiliation with this. They hadn't chosen you to do this. You had taken this upon. So it's a dream come true for them. Oh, we have to do no work, and they're building our fan base.
Yeah, they just tweeted it, talked about it on the pod. Yeah, they didn't do any work. And, I knew I would grow my following and people would become aware of my marketing agency, but it was very light. I didn't really sell anything, obviously. Yeah, so it was a great win-win for them, but it was just so much work. So he tried to hire me, and I was like, love you, Jason, but definitely don't want to work for you or anyone. I have my own business. Our product marketing agency had LinkedIn, Meta, Zora as clients. We were doing nearly $2 million a year in revenue. Like, I'm not an event manager. And so he's like, okay, what about a contract? Like just a consulting thing. And I was like, okay, I gave him a quote. He's like, wait a minute, that's way too much money. He's like, usually, I pay like a meetup planner $250 per meetup. And I'm like, well, A, how's that going? And B, sorry, this is how much it costs. Like, this is already a discounted rate because I want to work with you because you're an impressive person. And he's like, no, it's too much money. I'm like, all right, fine. And then 3 weeks later, he said, what if I give you $100,000 and you build a SaaS instead?
And what is a SaaS?
A software startup. A platform like Facebook or Airbnb is a SaaS. Uber is a SaaS. Netflix is a SaaS.
Okay. So he offers this suggestion.
Yeah.
And what is your first thought?
I'm not anti-VC, but venture capital. I didn't jump on it immediately. I definitely thought about it because I'm very familiar with, like, once you're on the venture train, that is a whole specific thing. But ultimately, I knew All In would be a customer. I knew his other podcast, This Week in Startups, would be a customer. And I knew I would have like kind of instant built-in distribution with him. And then honestly, a big part of it was just curiosity. Like, I'd done the bootstrap route. I worked in startups, just like curiosity always kills the cat. Just like, let's just learn what it's like. Kill this cat. Sometimes just like, you know what? If I say no to this, then I'll always wonder. And that will eat at me. So why don't we just say, fucking try it out?
And you mentioned earlier the DoorDash guy, the circumstances, just it seemed so easy at the time. And we were just kind of at a moment in time where that was necessary. And to your point about earlier about it being hard to meet people and people wanting to gather, and for as many different ways as we have to connect with people online more than ever, there also is kind of less intentionality behind that, less meaning behind that. And so people want to get together. And this was really a way for you to facilitate that thing that so many people are just craving right now.
Yeah. And just the way it kind of fell into my lap so organically, I felt like, I'm the only person who could do this because I'm the only person who like kind of has discovered this problem and believes there's a new way to do it, because so many investors or so many people are like, oh, there's already so many event apps. And I'm like, well, it's completely different though, because it's not oriented around the host. It's oriented around the community. For example, Scott Heiferman, the founder of meetup.com, he saw what we were doing and he reached out. We met him for lunch in New York, and he's just like, the biggest problem with Meetup is it becomes very fractured. So you have people who want to hike on Saturdays. Then someone brings their dog and it's misbehaved. And so now you have people who hike on Saturdays with dogs and people who hike on Saturdays without dogs. And then someone makes a comment about lesbians. And now we have lesbians with dogs on Saturdays and, no straight people without dogs. And there's no glue kind of saying, hey, everyone, get together, stay together. And then also the way the pricing model is you are charged as a host to be on Meetup so that people will discover your event. But once you find your people, you're just kind of in a text thread.
By the way,
Right.
Hosts are paying, but then hosts are also doing the work of setting up the damn thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And then also, like, really, they are producing distribution as well. Meetup provides some distribution, but the host is doing that as well. Like, it's pretty obvious watching All In and all these communities that have come on River, they're basically lending their distribution to the audience. And some of the audience steps up and hosts the events, and they don't charge, the hosts don't get charged. They get a lot of social capital out of doing it.
So Scott's frustration with his own pricing model was that only service providers end up staying on the platform long term, because if you move to a new city and you're like, I want to meet other hikers, then you just meet them and you're in a text group, and now you don't need to keep paying for Meetup.
Right.
And so
you just use it the one time until you found your people, and then you're off.
Yeah. And it just becomes kind of like, that's why most things on Meetup feel kind of just icky.
Ray, when the Meetup founder wanted to meet with you, what exactly was the reason for that meeting?
Well, the first time he DM'd me on Twitter, he was just like, hey, I'm the founder of Meetup, call me sometime. And I just thought that was very weird.
Yeah.
I was like, probably not real. Okay, whatever. But then literally the moment we announced that we raised $100,000 from Jason, 3 minutes later, an email gets forwarded to me from Scott Heiferman, who emailed Jason, their friends. And he was like, yo, this Ray lady's like not responding. Put me in touch with her. So then I was like, oh shit, it was the real Scott Heiferman this whole time. He started meetup.com. He was living in New York and he watched 9/11 happen. And he just saw a lot of hopeless people looking for connection, and he built a platform for it. And so he's really mission oriented. And I just think navigating a tech startup through the early aughts, he got acquired by WeWork, and then WeWork kind of imploded, and then Meetup kind of got sold off for parts. And I just think he had unfinished business there. Like, he built a great business, but I just think he had like an unfinished mission as well. He said he wasn't rooting for River in particular, but just rooting for any kind of community oriented platform or service or software that's bringing people together. He was very kind to meet with us a few times.
Okay. I wasn't sure if it was he wanted to acquire you guys or he wanted to sniff out the competition.
No, he'd moved on from Meetup. Because these companies, you kind of go through like a full life cycle. And he'd moved on. I think he's more political now. But it was great to connect with him. And I'm sure we'll stay in touch.
He had a lot of interesting insights too, which were super helpful.
Yeah. So the thing about River is we cannot create energy. We can just organize it. And so if you are really small and you don't have a big audience, like River won't be for you yet. I hope someday it could be. But if you have a really big audience, it's magical. So back to Tim Ferriss, the 4-hour work week. That's why we learned about what San Francisco was, moved out there, broke into tech. He had a tweet that said, hey fans, it's the 10th anniversary of the podcast coming up. What wild and crazy ideas do you have for how we can celebrate? So I immediately started stress sweating, dropped everything I was doing because I'm like, must reply to this tweet perfectly and quickly. And so I said, hey, Tim, we read the 4-hour work week. It inspired us to break into tech. Now we have our own startup that gets people together. I would love nothing more than to complete this full circle moment and power meetups all around the world for your fans. And 2 days later, I got an email from his team.
Wow.
And so we set up all the events. We create save the dates for these Tim Ferriss meetups all around the world in 150 cities. And he tweets it out. He emails his, 3 million something subscribers and he says, hey, go to River/Tim. And the events are geolocated. So based on your IP address from your computer, the nearest event to you shows up on top. And people are like, oh, wow, I'm in Portsmouth and there's an event in Boston. Okay, RSVP. You can register to attend, and that's a normal event, or you can apply to host. And if you apply to host, you get dropped into this kind of applicant tracking process, kind of like if you apply to a job. It's much lighter weight than that. And once you're approved, you take over edit access for that event, and you can say, okay, we're going to have it at, the Sam Adams Brewery, and it's going to be at 6:00 on this day, and there's room for 50 people. And so now the event is on, and the platform tracks, is there a location set? If there isn't, you get a reminder all the time. You get kind of reminded as a host. So these events got announced. 3 weeks later, 154 events happened around the world, all on the same day.
Wow.
With 4,500 people gathering. And then we did Zoom calls. Tim called in to 40 cities. And I think people made new lifelong friends because they're meeting people who have similar information diets, similar interests that they wouldn't otherwise meet.
When you got that email from Tim's team, how surreal was that?
Oh, it was insane. I mean, we've had so many insane moments with River. I mean, Before that, we actually got investment from Balaji Srinivasan, who is like very famous in Bitcoin. He's the CTO of Coinbase and
Oh, wow.
someone I really respect. He's got some interesting ideas about how we should organize ourselves. But this one really just felt special because I'm reading this 4-Hour Workweek book and I'm like, what's an angel investor? That sounds weird. What's Silicon Valley? So very full circle. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I would, make it in tech and like survive startups. And definitely didn't think I'd ever be building my own app. And certainly didn't think that Tim Ferriss would be using it. So yeah, it was brilliant.
You guys have mentioned this a few times. The whole raising of the money, you just wrapped up raising for a seed round, $1.5 million.
Yeah.
A pre-seed, yeah. We raised, 1.6, I think.
Okay. So the Seacoast people, I'm not sure if they're super in the weeds of tech and how all this works. And by that, I mean me. What is pre-seed funding?
Pre-seed or seed, that just literally means someone's giving you money without getting direct shares in your company.
Okay.
But what they are getting is the promise that when you do raise money and actually allocate shares, that those people will get a cut of those shares.
And so, I mean, raising money in Silicon Valley, insanely competitive. So many people are trying to get investment for their dream companies.
Yes.
How were you guys able to do this?
How
typical was this?
It seems untypical.
It's the longest 3 weeks of our lives.
Longest,
it's like 6 months.
Yeah. I mean,
of 3 weeks.
We had really early great signals. So Jason, just said, hey, if I invest $100,000, you can build a SaaS. Like, most people have to have 50 meetings just to get that. They need to put together a pitch deck. They've already written code. They're explaining their idea. I had just kind of accidentally proved this problem, that there was a problem and I was the right person to solve it. So that's incredibly rare. Several months later, we closed a $50,000 investment from Balaji Srinivasan. Again, if you're in the Web3 space as a dream investor, couldn't believe it. I will say putting together a pre-seed round after that was hard. Like I was kind of like lured into the earliest success and I was like, it'll just take us like a few months. But it really took 6 months. Ryan, myself, so our entire household, we're co-founders, and we have a third co-founder, Bernie. The three of us didn't take a salary for a year, so burning into savings, and thought maybe it would take 3 months, end up taking 6 months. To put a round together with 5-6 investors, you end up having over 100 meetings. And then, if you make it to the next stage, then you have second follow-on meetings, then you have pages and pages of memos to fill out, of like questions to go deep on investor due diligence, basically. Even then, once you feel like people are in, you still have to like put a minimum round together because no one wants to give you like a quarter tank of gas to drive to California. They want to make sure you can really like take a big swing. So ended up thinking we had it done. There's people who will say, oh yeah, like you have all these false positives. So many times I thought we were done and then we weren't done. And then we ended up getting like the last kind of big juicy investor that we needed. But they said, hey, even though you set out to raise $1.2 million, you actually need to raise $1.5 million for us to invest. So I'm just like, the bar keeps moving. But, we did it. 7 a.m. meetings, midnight meetings, investors in Singapore, investors in San Francisco.
And during all of this, what was keeping you going and so bullish on this product?
We weren't bullish 100% of the time, if I'm being really honest here.
Gloom and doom.
There
sometimes.
were probably I think there were 2 times where it was like, I can't wait until we run out of money.
What have we done?
I just want to actually build something that I'm not fighting and crying to like just have it exist.
Yeah.
I think what kept us going is the app was being used the entire time. It's amazing how just serving people makes you realize, wow, they still want to use this. It just like keeps you going. I think that for me is like the only thing literally that made me think
interesting.
This is worth building because people are still using it.
For me, it's 2 things. It's like the journey, like the curiosity of the journey is just like, well, it's hard to build a startup. Anytime someone makes some comment, like they see me working remotely from somewhere, they're like, oh, must be nice. I'm like,
why don't you take the day off?
You have no idea, my friend. And then the other thing is like, we had recruited a team. It wasn't just me and Ryan. We had Bernie as co-founder. We had Andrew as our founding engineer. We had Ed. We had Anna.
Sorry,
and it's like we're responsible for their livelihoods. So we made that $150,000 last a year for 6 people. that's just like not a lot of money to go around. But I was just like, I want to keep the team together. I want to provide a crazy, awesome work experience and just the journey of the story, like the uniqueness of the story, and just like really trying, because we all know what it looks like to go have a W-2 job at like a big tech conglomerate.
If River were a person, how old would you say River is?
18 months old. Just a baby. Yeah, I mean, the funny thing about River is because we work with really high profile influencers like All In, This Week in Startups, Tim Ferriss, Brian Johnson, people think that we're much older and like more further along in the journey than we are. Because usually you do not have this kind of traction early on. This is insane.
Yeah.
I have to remind myself of that sometimes. And so people will be like, I got a message the other day being like, it baffles me that you can't do this very simple thing in the app. Like, how is this possible? I'm like, well, it's possible because I made $150,000 last for 6 people for an entire year. And it's really just like whatever thing is on fire the most is what you're fixing. So the app is not like well-rounded out. There's just like a lot of obvious things that should be there. But you really have to focus on your differentiation. Like, what is the thing that only we can do that's going to prove that this is like worth building and worth using? And, all the kind of the nice stuff that's kind of table stakes that everyone else has. It's like, okay, we'll get to that, but we're really trying to prove that this is a real unique business and a unique offering first. But yeah, it's only 18 months old. This is like insanely young.
Okay. And what exactly is the business model?
So the influencers or the big brands pay River. And so All In is a customer of River. They pay us in exchange for us orchestrating and facilitating their meetups around the world.
Okay.
We also are building out a sponsorship marketplace. So someone could say, hey, I'm a Boston investor. This is a really interesting audience. I want to sponsor this event. I'll pay $500 to the platform to go towards, some beer and pizza. River takes a cut. The influencer takes a cut, and then the host gets the rest of that money. We're still building this feature out. And then we also do support paid events. So, it's a mixed business model, but attendees typically don't pay and hosts never pay to use River.
Okay, a few more questions for you guys. You guys are busy taking care of an 18-month-old, so I won't keep you for too long. So at every step since you guys started this whole tech journey years ago, you were going where the people were, where the buzz was. So San Francisco, Austin made a bunch of sense, even though you didn't end up there. New York City made a bunch of sense. And now you're in Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
Yes, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, final answer.
Love Portsmouth.
And you came here last summer, right around the time I did.
Nice.
Why?
We've always loved it here. Whenever we, quote, come home to visit and stay with Ryan's parents, it's in Haverhill, Massachusetts. So it's about 45 minutes to Boston or 35 minutes to Portsmouth. We always came up to Portsmouth. Our first date was at Popovers. And, Portsmouth just has a lot going on, but it's easy, cheaper, easier than Boston. And I had always said I wanted to retire here, which we assumed would be from a very long time from now. But the world has really changed. You don't have to be physically in a city where your customers are, where you're hiring. We have employees all over the world, in Zurich, Warsaw, Brazil, Austin, Texas, Argentina, everywhere. So it was kind of just like we used to live where we worked, and then we would like find little scraps of time to come home and visit family and be in the place we wanted to be. And then just the world flipped, and now we're where we want to be all the time. And then we squeeze in scraps of work trips if we need to. But even less and less, like we love it here. We've always loved it here. So
the dance community, they're like our second family.
We have a lot of dance friends here.
There's a dance community here.
The salsa bachata.
Yes, there's Latin dancers
samba.
in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. You had no idea.
I had no idea. Have you been to Popovers since you've been back?
Yes, we go all the time. I love their clam chowder.
Wow.
Great clam chowder.
And great Popovers.
Shout out to Popovers.
And we always get our anniversary cake made there because we love cake.
Oh my gosh.
Brown butter vanilla cake.
Yeah.
I need to spend more time at Popovers. I might pop over there after this.
Pop over to Popovers. Yeah, I just love the community here. We're true New Englanders in a way, like kind, but maybe not the most friendly, self-sufficient, independent, hardworking. Love the seasons.
I've asked this question on the podcast before, but I would love to hear your answer, because when we talk about the Seacoast, everyone and their mother, the first thing that they say about it is the community here is just different and special. And then what you guys are building is very community oriented, is built around bringing people together. And I would just love to hear from both of you, really, Ryan, starting with you. What does community mean to you?
The first thing that comes to mind is the serendipity of just being able to see people that live nearby you. And I know that doesn't actually quite fit in with the whole point of River, but just being able to see the same people on a regular basis such that you're filling each other's love bank so that you can do more meaningful things together, that you can lever that love bank, right? Like doing hard things together costs energy, and sometimes it costs like emotional energy too. And so when you're doing things with people regularly, you can take bigger swings, do bigger things together. Yeah, that's what community means to me. River is a little bit different because we're kind of making a play on like, hey, there's these influencers and people like, follow, share, comment them. Why don't we take them one step further down the funnel and just get them to actually do shit together? So that's the other side of it, is you have a common belief and then that drives you to do things with other people that have that common belief. So I think there's two parts. I think they both are legitimate. One of them is like just inherent. I just want community around me. And then the other one is I'm looking for people that believe the same things. Yeah, that's how I think about it.
For me, I wouldn't have been able to answer this until after I moved away. But when I moved to San Francisco, I just noticed, all the great things I talked about. There's a ton of energy, a lot of innovation there, but there's also a ton of flakiness. And there aren't very many acts of service for each other. And so if you're moving and you need help moving, like in New England, everyone come help you move, like buy some beer and pizza.
I'm calling him up. He owes me. Hey, remember that time I did that thing for you? Yeah.
Yeah. You owe me.
Now me.
No, but in other cities, I've noticed, people don't always show up for each other as much. It's like they're here for a good time, but not the hard times. So I really noticed that. I just think in big cities in particular, there's so many people and so many opportunities that you kind of keep your agenda open. You're like, I might be there but there might be like 16 other things to do.
A maybe. Hate a maybe.
Always a maybe. So people are really flaky. And people definitely don't do the same kind of acts of service. Whereas I feel like now I know, after traveling and living so many places, that in New England, people do like help each other and show up when they say they're going to show up. There is kind of a certain steadfastness, or like your word means something here more than I would say. And part of that's just it's a smaller town. And so if you keep burning bridges, you'll run out of them quickly because there aren't as many people. But I just think Portsmouth has this beautiful combination of like a lot going on, a lot of interesting people, but still has those kind of Seacoast, New England values and vibes.
I want to ask another question out of left field. From a previous conversation that we had, something you guys said really stuck with me because I wholeheartedly agree with you. You guys aren't big material possession people. You're big experience people. And you just love going out and doing things, novel experiences. And I think as we enter the holiday season, this is something fun to talk about when we're thinking about what to gift people. I love gifting people with experiences as much as possible. Why is this something that you guys are just adamant about, that you would much rather live your life from a place of having really fun, cool, different experiences, getting out of your comfort zone over just trying to rack up possessions and status symbols and things of that nature?
Well, first of all, we've moved like so many times. I don't know how many apartments we've lived in. It might be
12.
Like 12. So every time you move, you're like, who bought all this crap?
Yeah.
So, always been kind of minimalistic in that way. And I'm also like very environmentally conscious. So if someone gives me something I don't like, which is usually the case, like I can't just throw it in the trash because it's going to end up in a landfill. I need to like find a useful home for it. So now it's just creating more work for me. But also just like when I look back at like what are core memories, it is never, buying something or sitting around watching like a football game on the TV, which, maybe some people love that. But like the core memory is always the building of something, the hard thing, the like hiking the mountain and you didn't make it back in time, or being in a foreign country and you don't speak the language and you're starving, it's like those experiences that kind of create core memories. So I just feel like a lot of people don't put in the effort to gather people or create new experiences. So like, for example, Ryan's 40th birthday is coming up and I booked Strawberry Bank for private ice skating.
Whoa.
And, I could spend all that money on like booze and beer and food or whatever, or I can just
It's actually surprisingly cheap.
It's surprisingly
to
cheap.
reserve it.
And then everyone just has this memory of like, oh my God, remember that time we had the ice rink to ourselves? You know, it's just like, it's really special to create those memories.
Wow. You look like you're 30. It must be because of all the vegetables you're eating in the morning.
I have no idea.
Well, that's wonderful. I thank you so much for joining me today. I have one final question. We ask the same final question at the end of every episode every week, and I will ask it to both of you. Ryan, we'll start with you. What is the mission that you are on in your life right now?
I'd say right now, River, like, sorry to be cliche, just River really is that right now. I
think you have a much better answer than that.
Yeah, come on, do better.
Yeah, so I know for a fact that Ryan wants to build things.
All right, fine. Okay, so I really think at some point in the future, I want to do something in hardware again. River is not a stepping stone. River is just like Ray is constantly pressing buttons and discovered this thing that a lot of people want. And I do actually feel like a moral obligation to, like, and I'm serious when I say that, a moral obligation to press this lever and get people to do shit together, because we really need to probably spend more time face to face as a society.
Yeah, I think as we're moving into the age of AI, we have all this new technology and conveniences. I mean, when I moved to Boston to marry Ryan, like one time we moved to Waltham, we didn't really spend any time there. We spent 45 minutes looking for like a Dunkin' Donuts. Like now we have Google Maps, and you just don't spend, the amount of things we're able to get done has like drastically increased, but I don't necessarily think that we're spending all that extra time wisely. And so I think software and startups are moving into a new era. It isn't just how much time you can spend on social media every day, how many likes, how many rage bait things you can click on and get angry about. I think it's just like, can we use this new technology, this new hyperconnectivity to bring people together? Because everyone's nicer when they're in person instead of online. People accomplish more. They build better core memories, better experiences, tighter communities, more progress. So, you could just say that we're building like an event app, and if you're cynical, that's not very exciting. But Ryan and I, we aren't having children. We're child free, but we take company building very seriously because it's trying to create value for the employees that work with us. Having meaningful work is an incredible way to spend your time. And then being proud of something that you've built and the outcome, seeing people gather, be closer. I think that's pretty cool. And most companies have some kind of life cycle. Like you don't build a software company for 50 years. Usually it's a shorter time horizon than that. But I think Ryan and I will always be building things that are interesting and like unique to us, things that only we can build. We like doing it. It definitely makes the hard days a little easier.
That's Raechel and Ryan Lambert, the co-founders of the River app. If you'd like to learn more about it, then please visit getriver.io, the link to which is in today's show notes. I've also placed links to the 4-Hour Workweek and other topics we discussed. It's a big week here at Seacoast Stories, and I strongly suggest you follow at Seacoast Stories Podcast on Instagram so that you can be the first to find out when big news drops. And before I go, I just want to express my gratitude to all of you for listening, for writing to me about how much you enjoy the show, for following, for leaving reviews, and for stopping me when you see me in town. For that, I am very thankful. I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving, that you take some time to unwind, that you can share some stories with the people you care about the most. As Raechel and Ryan know, that is when life is at its best. I'll be back next Monday with another episode, but until then, happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Live free or die.